Thanks, Pat. Fahad, Hardin, thanks for your patience. Hopefully Jamal can join us. One of the beauties of this format is we can tie in any people from all over the world, in particular in the region. And the difficulty is that we've run in the past is there are various firewalls that sometimes prevent this. Pat and I are really excited about this format, and this is an example of why. We're able to pull this together on short notice outside of our regular cycle of FocusKSA sessions. We were struck, by the question of who is making sense on Iraq, and there's a wide variety of opinions, some informed, some balanced, some objective, some not. And we wanted to take a run at this with people we knew were informed, insightful, and had given great thought and had extensive experience on the subject. So we're excited to have Fahad, Hardin, and hopefully Jamal shortly. As a sort of starting point, and I consider myself as representative of people interested in the topic and what's going on. There are three questions that strike me immediately as the questions that should be addressed before a policy can be developed or some sort of strategic response can be initiated. And the three questions are, what is ISIS' relationship with Sunni tribes in Iraq? Second, what is the Saudi relationship with ISIS? And third, what leverage does Saudi Arabia have in Iraq, and how does that apply to what policy choices the U.S. might make? Now, I understand that each of you has expertise and as a particular area of focus, but I hope we can get to some of these basic questions because they're operational questions that determine whether we can make a difference at all. So with that, allow me to turn it over. Initially, Jamal was going to lead off. We're still trying to get him in. So let's hold on, Jamal, and Fahad, if we can start with your thoughts, that'd be terrific.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Pat and Richard, for inviting me to participate in this important and timely panel, and it's a great honor to be among such a great company. So going back to one of your questions, and really what I want to focus on today is, and obviously Iraq has dominated the news for the past 2 or 3 weeks now, and as Richard said, a lot has been written about it. One of the main point that I would like to focus on, and it's is this notion that Saudi Arabia is somehow responsible for much of the unrest in Iraq, and specifically that it is somehow that it's actually supporting ISIS, the Al-Qaeda offshoot that is now based along the Iraqi-Syrian border, and so if all one has to do is spend a few minutes on social media, and they're bound to come across dozens, if not hundreds, of entries advancing this notion that Saudi Arabia is responsible, that they support Daesh, as some people call it, and that somehow the violence and unrest along its borders is a good thing for Saudi Arabia. Now, it's one thing for casual observers to jump to that conclusion. It's something else for experts to essentially make the same argument. Now, as you alluded to, Richard, I've come across a number of articles by fairly well-respected analysts and scholars that are essentially, at least the titles imply, that there is indeed a relationship between Saudi Arabia and Daesh, between the Saudi government and Daesh, and that it's actually an official relationship. Now, what's interesting is that if you read the actual articles, invariably just about everybody at some point adds a caveat by saying, well, there is no actual real evidence suggesting that, but they still make the argument anyway. And I've seen that exact phrase used over and over again. And of course, there's no doubt that obviously Saudi of Daesh, the Saudi government has actually put some of these former militants or former fighters who were in Syria and themselves over to Saudi authorities. They've been put on TV and have recounted their cautionary tales about their experience in Syria. And these fighters are fairly upfront. They say, yes, there are Saudis in Syria, and they tend to gravitate towards ISIS. But that's obviously not the same thing as saying that there's official government support of Daesh or of Al-Qaeda. Now, the other issue was that there's money from individual donors and charities in the past that was going to Al-Qaeda affiliates, but the Saudis have really cracked down on that. They have what seems to be a fairly effective infrastructure that really has cut down on the money going from individuals and charities to questionable and to militant groups. Recently, it's actually Kuwait that has come under the spotlight. I believe it was the Treasury Department itself has singled out Kuwait for not having the legal infrastructure to prevent money going from individual donors and organizations to militant groups in Syria. So it's not Saudi Arabia. It's my understanding that the U.S. government and other governments actually have praised the Saudi effort in that regard to stem the flow of money. And of course, and again, while there's no evidence suggesting that the Saudi government is supporting Daesh, there's plenty of evidence saying that Daesh has actually vowed to take the fight to Saudi Arabia once it is done, once it has accomplished its supposed mission in Syria and Iraq. There's more than a handful of videos on YouTube by Daesh supporters, including Saudis. You see them, they're ripping out their passports, thereby denouncing their citizenship and actually vowing to liberate the land of the two holy mosques once they're done in Syria. More importantly, obviously, the Al-Qaeda has a long history of conducting and carrying out terrorist attacks in Saudi Arabia going back to 2003 to 2006, and many more have been attempted since. Just past the last month, the Saudi authorities busted a cell that they actually referred to as a vast network that was inside Saudi Arabia that was acting as a conduit between Syria-based Al-Qaeda, Daesh specifically, and the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Yemen. There was dozens of arrests made, and this has happened over and over again. Obviously, the Saudi government has arrested many Al-Qaeda supporters over the years. Many of them have been killed. So that's what's substantiated. That's what's documented. To me, it really doesn't make sense for Saudi Arabia to actively and to willingly support one of its neighbors with whom it shares a vast border to unravel and to become a failed state, and to have an Al-Qaeda state go and rise up from the ashes of the civil war. It defies common sense to me. It also, I think, defies a long history of Saudi Arabia's, whereas foreign policy has dedicated on, I think, more than anything else, on stability. And again, we see this in how it's approached the crises in other countries. Perhaps Egypt is the most obvious example where, for lack of a better term, the Saudis prefer reactionary policies. They've never been known to support revolutionary politics or policies or groups. Syria is the one exception, and I think even though their inclination initially was not to support, or at least was called, the Saudis called on the Assad regime for many months to come to a peaceful resolutions and to meet the demands of the mostly Sunni protesters. Obviously, that didn't happen, and so once Assad cracked down on armed groups as well as obviously civilians in Syria, I think the Saudis were compelled to play a role, and they've been pretty upfront about supporting the right of the Syrian people to defend themselves. Some people have been able to document actual support to Syrian opposition groups, but not ISIS, not in Iraq, and not in Syria up to this point.
Can I make a quick just a quick clarification? Fahad, you're using the Arabic acronym, Dash, and
Dash, yeah, sorry, I get
and no, that's
I think
smart
we,
too.
some of us.
And no, but this is it's an important point because I mean ISIS, Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or Al-Sham, depending on who you're talking. ISIS, Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, but you're using the Arabic acronym. It's important to understand why the distinction and why do you use Daesh?
Well, to be honest, I use Daesh. Apparently, that ISIS or ISIL itself really hates it when people refer to them as Daesh. They've apparently, in some of the areas that unfortunately fell under their control in Iraq, they've made sure to tell the locals not to use it and that whoever will use it will be punished. So I thought I'd have a little bit of fun and use it as many times as possible today, just to, take a little jab at them. My guess is they don't have much of a sense of humor about it, but that's fine. I can live with it.
But that's good to know for all those ISIS members who are tuning in today.
I wouldn't be surprised. I've actually, some of them have contacted me via Twitter. It seems like there's dozens of them now. I don't know how many of them are actually affiliated with the group or just big fans and supporters, but I've had interesting conversations on lines with them, so I wouldn't be surprised if some are watching right now.
Thank you. That's useful. So ISIS, Daesh, they're interchangeable for the purposes of this conversation. I hope that.
They're really all. Yeah, and they're all awful, whichever name you use. It's obviously arguably the worst Al-Qaeda branch ever. So.
I think Jamal hasn't been able to join us. So Hardin, if we can transition to you, I think Pat talked a little bit about the report that you and your colleagues with Center of American Progress.
We haven't discussed it yet, Richard.
Right.
But go ahead.
We're very fortunate to have Hardin Lang with us. He and his colleagues at the Center for American Progress, Brian Katulis and Vikram Singh, have just issued a piece and a study entitled "On the Brink: Managing the ISIS Threat in Iraq," and so he's obviously extremely deeply involved in this topic and has developed an approach that we'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Hardin.
Great, thanks very much. First, I'd like to thank Sutras for the invitation to come to speak. I apologize to all those joining that I'm not appearing on your screen. It appears that our security protocols at my office are so advanced that they can't manage to differentiate between the Chinese and Sutras. That said, I thought what I might do is sort of step through very quickly some of the recommendations we made last week when we came out with a report. I mean, many of them not overtaken by events or sort of well inside of the bloodstream of what we see over with what the administration is doing. But I think what would be helpful is to maybe talk about each and then show how and try to articulate the latch point for our relationship with Saudi Arabia within each policy vector. So what we did we were trying to clarify what core U.S. objectives are at the moment in the theater in the wake of the events the last couple of weeks. So we set it out as first to weaken ISIS or Daesh to prevent it from controlling substantial territory in Iraq, from which it can become a threat to the region, allies, and the U.S. homeland. 2, reduce threat of growing sectarian conflict from sparking a wider civil war in the region. 3, safeguard reliable and capable partners such as Jordan, Turkey, and the KRG. To get there, we set out 5 key steps. The first of these, and this is pretty much the orthodoxy in town now, is to condition U.S. assistance to Iraq on government reform and action to incorporate and empower quote-unquote moderate Sunni. We can have a conversation about what, but we were all, I think everyone was welcomed President Obama's call for the assurance that the Iraqi government will now take action to unify the country and reduce sectarian tension. How that's going to happen is a whole other set of questions we can get into if you want. Our sense is that all further aid, except for efforts deliberately designed to degrade ISIS's threat to Baghdad, and humanitarian assistance for those displaced should be conditioned on a serious and significant commitment in Baghdad to greater regional autonomy and inclusive governance. Our second recommendation was to inoculate against a regional war and crack down on regional support for ISIS. Here we urge that the U.S. should engage in a full court press throughout the region involving top military, intel, and diplomatic officials to persuade relevant regional stakeholders, and here Turkey, Jordan, Saudi Arabia at the head of the list, and even Iran, to step back from actions in Iraq and Syria that could lead to wider conflagration. And here we thought one of the more helpful mechanisms we should probably get into would be the Gulf Cooperation Council. I mean, last month, Defense Secretary Hagel was out, and he secured a general commitment to work together to enhance regional security, including overall measures to limit ISIS. Here we're working, or trying to put on our thinking caps and maybe work a little bit closer with David Cohen's shop over at Treasury, OFAC, to do a little bit more work with Saudi and others. This not to target, obviously, official government assistance moving out to ISIS, but individual or private assistance that may be moving from certain countries in the Gulf out to ISIS. And we can have a conversation about the evidence base for that. And here, I mean, Saudi has a critical role to play in terms of what they have access to, what they can see, and how we can all work together to make that happen. Step 3 is to mobilize regional stakeholders through a big diplomatic push for a political solution. And here I think we already see a lot of this happening. The U.S. Should be playing a lead role in intensive diplomatic effort. Secretary Kerry is obviously in theater. We need to work in developing a strategy and coordinated approach to pull Iraq back from the brink. And here what we're looking at is the model from 2006 to 2008, where the United States participated in diplomatic discussions involving all of Iraq's neighbors, including Iran, to help decrease the violence in the region. This is a moment where everyone, obviously in the region, needs to be as productive as possible in trying to quiet some of the tension. Very, very difficult. We all acknowledge at this point. But clearly putting together some sort of diplomatic group, I mean, something like 6+2, what we use in Afghanistan, may obtain, but where Saudi has a lead role at the table with all the other actors to help us work on this. Because Saudi has some impressive contacts inside of some of the tribal affiliates out in the Triangle, and they're going to be critical to the solution here. Step 4, we need to reinforce reliable and capable partners in the region. The United States in particular, we're looking at key regional partners like Jordan, who are already swamped by the outflow and the impact of the civil war in Syria. On the U.S. side, there's more we can do, probably a little bit more ISR, more on the security intelligence, a little bit more in support to the Jordanian military. We're also looking at some of that stuff for Turkey and the KRG. Here, what we would hope for from the Gulf, and particularly from Saudi, the kingdom has been tremendously generous in its humanitarian assistance for Syrian refugees from the crisis in Syria. Jordan and a couple of other countries, but particularly Jordan, it's less to do with the problem of Syrians now living in camps in Jordan, and more to do with the 80% of Syrian refugees who live outside and who are taxing the general infrastructure of the country. And there are some additional cash transfers to the Jordanian government to help them shore up their basic infrastructure, and social services will be a critical element sort of holding this piece together. And I think we would all welcome Saudi's role in that. 5, our final recommendation obviously is to prepare limited counterterrorism operations against ISIS, including possible airstrikes. We can go into more detail here, but I mean, clearly we're seeing the 300 Special Forces advisors who have been deployed have a great deal to do with working out which units inside of the Iraqi military are still battle ready, and then how, if it came down to it, we could be able to collect intel, develop target sets, and mobilize in order to sort of turn the tide against ISIS. Obviously a very tricky exercise. We can get into the tactics of it if it's something you guys are interested in. But the immediate question this obviously raises is ISIS is, in all likelihood, if you do turn the tide, a lot of it will slip back into Syria. And then we get into questions about how we work with our partners, including Saudi, to do a little bit more work with the Syrian opposition so that it's a more comprehensive and global response to the ISIS threat. I think with that, I will turn it over to the rest of our panelists and those who are joining us for questions. Thank you.
we see Jamal Khashoggi is entered as an audience member, and we're trying to get him in as a panelist. Jamal, are you with us? Can you?
Yes, I am. I can hear you.
Wonderful.
Excellent.
Good.
Welcome, welcome to our FocusKSA webinar. We apologize for the difficulties we've had bringing you into our group. We did open the webinar, and Fahad Nazer has given a presentation, and Hardin has as well. We hope you'll be ready to talk with us about your perspective on this important issue. And if that's the case, I'll turn the floor over to you for your opening remarks. We may not get you on webcam, but we're extremely pleased to have you here. Jamal Khashoggi is a distinguished journalist in Saudi Arabia, and he is currently editor-in-chief of Alarab news channel. And Jamal, are you prepared to make your opening remarks?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I am. The day had been saved by my iPad. I had a problem with Windows 8. All right, I had a head up with all the information I heard from Fahad and my other colleague. Yes, it is a very difficult time that requires some different measures. I feel very much that God is setting the stage in the whole region for a dramatic change for the region that was created unnaturally by foreign powers a whole century ago. But just like what happened after 9/11, major players are doing the wrong things. For example, Maliki and Iran together, they are refusing to make Maliki step down and create a national unity government so Saudi Arabia and the states and other countries can generate support, a broad-based support for the country of Iraq. But the Iranians and the al-Maliki are stuck in their sectarian mindset. And it looks like there is no future for a national unity government in Iraq. What is worse, that some voices began to appear suggesting that Bashar al-Assad could be a source of stability and pressure should be eased on him, but that is disastrous because Bashar al-Assad and his government are the magnet for the whole chaos that we are witnessing now. A third negative matter that could widen also the chaos in the region, that Egypt, rather than it goes to national reconciliation, it's still digging deep into polarization, more polarization, and duel and the politics of fear, hate, and revenge. But two countries, I think, are doing the right things, whether by design or because they realize their limitations and their inabilities to change the situation on the ground. That's Saudi Arabia and the states, the US. It is good that they are not they are keeping their distance from the situation in Iraq, and I think they should continue in doing so. I just saw on the news a short while ago a report by an Iraqi television that Americans are bombing Al-Qaim crossing in Iraq, and I hope it is not true, because there is another report says it's Syrians. I don't think it is the right thing to do right now. My prediction that ISIS will stop in Iraq when it cannot go any further. It will consolidate power, digest what it had gained, relax, but not for long. It sees an opportunity, that is Syria, and it doesn't want to lose momentum. I think eventually we're going to see more of Daesh or ISIS operation in Syria. There is something very important to notice. ISIS doesn't advance depending only on its military power and spreading of fear. They use fear to advance. It looks for land that is devastated politically. The political infrastructure in any land that is devastated is like it's a magnet for ISIS. And Syria is very much that land. It is just like the flood that runs into lower land. And Syria is a lower land for ISIS. The political, social structure are destroyed in Syria. And that's why I wrote my article a couple of days ago that was translated by Al-Arabiya today, where I said, save Syria, Iraq is lost. And by saving Syria, I mean to bring down Bashar and create some kind of a moderate democratic regime that will take maybe 5-6 years to be created, but that will save Syria from being overtaken by ISIS, whole or partly. How could that affect Saudi Arabia? For that ISIS country to spread from Mosul to Aleppo. And I want, in my article, I said, I asked people to look at the map, the original map, the first draft of CytesPico's map. That map, which was created by Orientalists, French politicians, and British, got it right. They put Mosul part of Syria. And that is exactly what is happening right now. And they also make an allocation for Kurdistan. And again, that is also happening now. So somehow CytesPico's map is being corrected by force majeure. So how could that affect Saudi Arabia to have this territory in the north controlled by ISIS? It means a new neighbor who hate and despise the government and the royal family. We see that in their rhetoric, and they see Saudi Arabia as their enemy, not their next enemy, their current enemy. More dangerously, it will be a safe haven with plenty of resources to sit and plan. Some of the most time for ISIS, when they relax, when they have a heavy meal at night, have the fire and sit and start talking and planning. This is going to happen. They have the safe haven. There is also euphoria. It is high time for Al-Qaeda and ISIS recruitment departments, whether in Saudi Arabia or the world. If ISIS recruitment ratio was 1,000 last month, it must be 5,000-6,000 today. However, we should not anticipate by any means any scenario like Al-Mosul, ISIS takeover of a major city. Again, Saudi Arabia political structure is stable, Jordan political structure is stable, so we shouldn't worry about such a thing like that. Can we live with ISIS? Of course not, but do we have a choice? We don't have a choice. The only way to remove ISIS is to send ground troops, and nobody in Washington will go for that. My suggestion, just leave it alone, do a secret deal, tell them that if they constitute a threat to anybody, that they will be obliterated, and wait for two things to happen. I will end here. Either ISIS make a fatal mistake, which repeatedly they have done in the past, and turn the local population against them. Today, the local population, they are welcoming them because of their hate and despise of Maliki's government. But if they do their routine, their arrogance, their harsh dealing with the population and turn the population into them, that could give us an opportunity to intervene and support opponents of ISIS. The other thing that could happen, God forbid, is a major terrorist attack in the US, Europe, or Saudi Arabia that is originated in ISIS land. If that happens, that will change the mood in Washington, and that will be a direct threat to American security, and it will be 9/11 again. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Let me pass it on to Fahad very quickly with one just one comment. It seems that Jamal sort of dropped a bomb there, essentially saying that Sykes-Picot is outdated and should be discarded. And welcoming, I'm not sure, Jamal, you can correct this, welcoming, what is sort of perhaps crassly called, a Shiistan, a Kurdistan, and a Sunnistan, with ISIS in the central region. That's something that's been discussed. It's incendiary in a lot of circles, but I'm curious your response, Fahad, and then Hardin after you.
Sure. I mean, I certainly agree completely with Jamal when he said that. I mean, if there's one culprit for all of this, if there's a person that we can blame for much of this, it's Bashar al-Assad. I wrote in as early as January 2012 an article warning that Syria had the potential to become the next Afghanistan, that it could become a hub of Islamist militants, and unfortunately that's exactly what has happened. Assad's brutality has galvanized Al-Qaeda, and has allowed it to frame a narrative, a jihadist narrative that unfortunately has resonated with Islamists and Muslims across the globe. That's why you see hundreds, thousands actually, of Muslims from all over the world, from Europe, the US, and obviously there's Saudis there, there's Afghans, Pakistanis, various people from various African nationalities, and Assad was the problem. He created much of this. The fact that people, as Jamal alluded to, are suggesting that we should just discard that and move on. He's done an enormous amount of damage. He's enabled Al-Qaeda to revive itself. There are many who actually suggest that there is behind-the-scenes agreement between Assad and ISIS. People have pointed out to the fairly well-established fact that there's been some oil dealings between ISIS, as some oil fields have come under their control. They actually managed to, they did trade and sell some of that oil to Assad's regime. People have also found it very interesting that for the most part, Assad's forces have neglected to attack ISIS's strongholds in Syria. ISIS itself and some of the Saudi fighters who just fought and who came back to the kingdom and turned themselves into authorities have confirmed this. They said that the Saudis and ISIS itself is not fighting the regime. It's too busy fighting with other opposition groups. There's almost no fighting of the regime. That's almost an afterthought. So I think I agree there. Now, in terms of the issue of can the world come to terms or with an ISIS or Al-Qaeda run state of some sort, I don't think so. I think that's very dangerous. I follow what ISIS has done in Syria. I mean, with social media these days, everything is well documented. You have videos of basically everything that has happened in Syria over the past 3 years. And as brutal as Assad has been, ISIS is equally as bad, as I've argued in a couple of articles at this point. I don't think that there is no lesser evil between the two. I think they're both equally abhorrent. Both need to be dealt with. I don't think and to be honest, we would be doing a great service to the people of Syria who have suffered mightily to say that, well, they should just live with Assad, or that they should live with ISIS. I think they're both terrible options. Now, on the other hand, there are no easy solutions to Syria or Iraq for that matter because of the sectarian issue that Jamal alluded to. I think it makes it incredibly difficult for the Saudis, for instance, to get involved. As I've argued in the past, I mean, arguably, the Saudis have their worst relationship with Maliki. And of course, Maliki hasn't helped things by blaming Saudi Arabia for everything that has gone wrong in Iraq. So moving forward, or Saudis playing a positive role is going to be very difficult because of all these issues. They're obviously, they don't want ISIS to be in control, but they also have an extremely strained relationship with Maliki, so it's a very difficult situation for them.
Hardin, please feel free to weigh in.
Thanks very much. I'll just make a couple, one or two very brief points on the question of Sykes-Picot. Last week we spent some time up on the Hill talking to members briefing members on what we had seen, what we thought, and fielding their questions. And this question came up a couple of times. And I'll say kind of the same thing that I said and now that I said then. It's, you know, no one's arguing that the way in which the map was drawn was correct, and no one was arguing that the outcome is a good one. The question is, how do we get from here to something else? And the situation's bad in Iraq, and it's worse in Syria. The question is, what would happen, how you would go about like a process to engage in redrawing state lines at this stage. Who takes agency in that process? How do people living in the middle of the civil war at the moment have an opportunity to participate in that? And then whenever we've seen something like this happen, states break apart as they are at the moment, or things are going difficult, civilians are the ones who do the lion's share of the suffering. And I wonder, you know, as bad as it is right now in Syria and as bad as it is right now in Iraq, it could get worse. And there are milestones between, you know, there are ways to look at further decentralization, look at moving power out of Baghdad into some of the regions. There are things that can be done a little bit short of opening up Pandora's box. And if we're going to open up that box, we need to be pretty clear about how we give voice and agency to the populations there in that process, and then who guarantees the security of the overall process. I spent a long time in the Department of Peacekeeping Operations before coming to Washington, and I don't think I've ever seen one of these things happen unless you have a massive security guarantee presence. And I don't know who's positioned to provide that at this stage. Thanks.
Jamal, I guess we can circle back to you. I mean, and that's a fascinating insight from Hardin, and I think it's critical really to get some sort of perspective on what U.S. lawmakers are thinking, because they in some ways need to be informed and often aren't sufficiently. So Hardin, I'm glad you're talking with people up there. Jamal, I think everyone agrees that it all circles back to Assad in Syria. Do you think that if there were an effective approach to either removing him or marginalizing him enough, that this would have a positive knock-on effect with regard to ISIS and obviously the fracturing in Iraq?
Hardin illustrated the difficulties that facing a superpower. So you can imagine the difficulties facing a country like Saudi Arabia to change the situation up north. No one can guarantee that removal of Assad will put an end to this chaos. If that took place 2-3 years ago, we would have been today in a similar situation like Libya, where they have an election tomorrow. Maybe today we will be having an election in Damascus tomorrow after the fall of Assad 3 years ago, but that did not happen. But the fall of Bashar, at least, it will put an end to this what I called lowland that attract magnet, bring ISIS in. It could create a situation that will limit the advance of ISIS into Syria. But to leave the situation in chaotic, in chaos right now in Syria, that is an open invitation to ISIS. And it's just a matter of time. And we're going to see ISIS advancing. Last night, Jabhat al-Nusra Front, which is the twin brother of ISIS, withdrew from the Bukamal village that is across the border from Iraq. At the moment, ISIS took over Al-Qaim, because Al-Nusra, even though they are Al-Qaeda affiliate, they know the kind of a treatment they will be met with ISIS. ISIS are good as long as you do not, as long as you don't oppose me. They tolerate you as long as you obey and swear allegiance to the Amir al-Mu'mineen. So if Al-Nusra Front wants to continue and survive in Syria, they have to swear allegiance to ISIS. So the recipe is for ISIS expansions. They will take over not the land, but they will also take over allegiance from others. They do not share power. They are the power, and everybody has to join them. So that is why I think it is a must to give a measure to bring down Bashar al-Assad system and try to protect Syria from ISIS.
Thank you, Jamal. Let me add that we've had a comment from Chris Blanchard from the Congressional Research Service. Thanks for joining us in the audience, Chris, and thanks for your tip that the Pentagon Press Secretary Admiral Kirby has responded to the rumors about the attack in Iraq. He has tweeted, according to Chris, quote, "No truth to rumors in media today that U.S. drones struck ISIL targets in Iraq." Jamal, let me ask you a question, and Richard's going to follow up with questions and relay questions from the audience. So let me ask the audience to go ahead and use your control panel to submit questions, and we'll pass those to our panel. Jamal, what's your sense of the implications, and this is a little bit off the central topic of the implications for Saudi Arabia, but I'm interested in the implications for the Saudi-U.S. relationship. Prince Mohammed bin Nawaf, the ambassador in London, wrote the other day in the Telegraph kind of a strongly worded piece about foreign intervention, and used words such as U.S. airstrikes would be madness and inflame the situation further. What's your take on as sides line up with new policies to deal with this, how that's going to play out in the U.S.-Saudi relationship?
Probably we are in agreement. I think the Saudi Arabia and the States are on agreements on what to do in Iraq. Number one, they both agree that Maliki must step down and create a national unity government in Iraq. A broad-based government that will include everybody, Iyad Allawi, Tariq al-Hashmi, all Sunnis, tribal leaders. That could, it doesn't guarantee, that could create an environment for a united Iraq. Could create a situation to bring support, Arab support, to the whole of Iraq. It could, but it doesn't guarantee that. Maybe it is too late, and again, there is no sign of that coming from Iran or from Maliki. Maybe they want that. Maybe they want Shia Iraq. Maybe the Iranians and the Iraqis will want that, want to carve that area and create their own Shia Iraq. Just like the Kurds, they see the opportunity of having finally the Kurdistan, and today President Barzani said something very remarkable, that Kirkuk is Kurdish. And now the issue of Kirkuk will be moved from Baghdad to probably the Amir al-Mu'mineen in Mosul, Mr. al-Baghdadi, to deal with the Kurds. I just see a matter of time till the borders will be drawn between the three entities. Also, I think the Saudis can agree on the limitations of both countries they can do inside ISIS territories, ISIS land. I wasn't surprised for the denial of the Pentagon about this rumor about the bombing, because number one, it doesn't help. You don't. The only way to destroy ISIS is to start a full war, ground war, airstrikes all over their territories, and send their troops, and this is not going to happen. So to bomb there, it will just create more. It will just incite Daesh or ISIS to go into its terrorist natural path. So it is better not to do that again. It will not help. It will just make damage. It will not stop their advancement, but it will. If ISIS cross border to Jordan, that is something else. So I agree very much with Prince Mohammed bin Nawaf that it is better now just to sit and watch and not do anything and try to protect what is safe, like south of Iraq. So we will avoid a sectarian bloodshed, to keep the operation or ISIS advancement from Kurdistan. And it's very obvious. ISIS are smart enough not to go there. And there is something very also interesting, that ISIS so far has avoided moving eastward toward Iranian borders. And they are allowing or not minding the Peshmerga to take control of those areas, even with the fall of Iraqi's armies there, as if they do not want to be in direct confrontation or in direct contact with the Iranians. So I begin to see ISIS transforming from a terrorist organization into, I don't know, something like a state building. They are in that mood right now, so they have to play politics more carefully.
In terms of the recent announcement that the United States is sending 300 advisors into Iraq, is there any reaction that you'd like to share to what Obama has already done and stated that he's prepared to do?
It will not help much. It could, and I remember Mr. Obama or Mr. Kerry was referring to the saving Baghdad. I think that is the most the Americans can do. It's just to save Baghdad, to save the Sunni and the Shias, those stronger communities from clashing against each other. That will be good. That somehow we need to create a border, and those borders begin to appear between Kurdistan and ISIS. You see the black flags of ISIS 100 meters away from the Kurdistan, the Kurds flags. So the borders, they begin to appear and to be. It will take time. Something interesting about ISIS: it doesn't respect or recognize international laws, international normalities. So it is not going to be invited into an Arab League meeting in Cairo and sit across the table and sign some kind of a treaty with. No, they're not going to do that. They are just they're coming out from 10th century conqueror. They see themselves just like the early Muslim conquerors, the Abbasid, the Umayyad, with the same style. So that is something also we need to monitor. Are they going to develop? Are they going to accept international regulations, international laws? So far, they are not.
Yes, sort of to expand on a question posed by Mansour Abu Hussein, who asked the question, you know, shouldn't the U.S.-Saudi priority be to shore up Saudi internal defenses, and making sure sectors of society don't feel alienated? And I think that's particularly apropos to your comments, Jamal. I mean, the compulsion in the U.S. to respond to Syria initially and now even in Iraq, based on humanitarian factors alone, is terrific. I mean, the suffering, as Fahad and Hardin and you have all pointed out, is of astronomical proportions. How difficult, and you're suggesting, as I hear you, that Saudi Arabia is probably best served by hunkering down, sort of riding out the storm. Is this possible, when there's such a close connection with Syrians, with certainly Sunni relationships there? What sort of pressure would Saudi Arabia be under from the society if the decision was in effect to not do anything?
But we've been sitting still for the last 3 years and a half. Saudi Arabia come out strongly in support of the Syrian people in the diplomatic circles, in all of the meetings, in the United Nations Security Council, and humanitarian. Saudi Arabia helped a lot, a great deal. Even militarily, it supported the rebel. It supported it tried to create a decent Syrian army to counter Bashar with the help of the Jordanians and the Americans and others. That clandestine project that is taking place in Jordan. But it did not work to bring down the system. We just, maybe the most we did is we just helped the Syrians not to be totally defeated and obliterated by Bashar. But we were not able to bring down Bashar and start a new Syria. And that is the issue. We should work into starting a new Syria, not to inflame and continue this civil war. We need to put an end to the situation. As Geneva 1 called and Geneva 2 is for to create a transitional government. The key word is to start a new Syria. And we are not there, not us, not the Americans, nobody. And just like how we brought down Gaddafi, or how the Americans in 1991 forced Milosevic, or 92, I think, or 94, Milosevic to go to the negotiating table at Dayton. There's nobody pressuring Bashar to come to any table to reconcile. So actually, that's what we all doing. The Americans, the Saudis, we're just sitting still and talking about Syria. As we talk right now, Bashar is bombing Syrians with barrels of explosives. Very ugly, and nothing is happening.
Fahad, and Hardin, I can't see you, so if you have a hand raised, go ahead and let us know.
Yeah, so I mean, again, I agree with Jamal. I think that as the world's attention has turned to Iraq over the past 2-3 weeks, it seems that Bashar has taken advantage of that situation, has increased his assault in Syria. And again, there's a reason that over 3 years have passed since this conflict has begun, and it seems to be that where the international community is not even close to resolving it. Again, and the main problem is, of course, that you have Assad, which is has proven to be a brutal, authoritarian, autocratic regime of the worst kind. On one side, you have ISIS on the other end. Of course, there is the beleaguered Syrian people in the middle who began this. Of course, as we all recall, this was originally a peaceful protest for dignity and for their human rights to be respected. There was it became militarized soon thereafter, after Bashar, of course, cracked down on them. But there is the more secular leaning opposition. But for now, the international community again looks at it as which do you prefer? Which is the lesser of two evils, as I mentioned earlier? Is it Assad or is it ISIS? And it seems that many are coming to the conclusion that, well, we can't really support either, so we'll stay out of it. And unfortunately, the people of Syria have paid a very heavy price for that. And Iraq, I think, will prove to be just as difficult now. Malik is no Assad, at least not until this point. but there's no question that his policies have played a great role in, again, creating a fertile ground for ISIS to come to the fore and to lead this offensive. Years ago, the Sunni tribes and others have showed their willingness, and they committed and were successful in driving Al-Qaeda out of Iraq, or at least certainly lessening its violence. But and then since 2000, I guess that happened 2007, 2008, Malik unfortunately did not fulfill his commitments to integrate the members who made up the Sons of Iraq, who by some estimates were as many as 90,000 people, into his regular security forces, and that has created that has led to the feelings of marginalization. And as we know, Al-Qaeda thrives and always exploits political vacuums or any feelings of marginalization, certainly by Sunnis, and that's what they pounced on that in Syria, and unfortunately they're doing it again in Iraq.
Hi, this is Hardin. Can I jump in here for a second?
Please.
I just offer a couple of quick observations. My sense is that on Syria, obviously for the last 3 years, the United States has undertaken a significant and serious humanitarian effort in response to the civil war. There were efforts, obviously, the diplomatic front, Geneva. The military effort, or the effort to sort of train and equip, primarily has been one of non-military support, with a couple of covert operations in Qatar and Jordan to sort of up-arm very small elements of the opposition. If we look at the result, though, the way in which I think folks here in Washington may understand the strategy, it's been one largely of containment. That is, the situation in Syria is bad, but the objective is going to be to keep it from spilling out of Syria's borders. I think it's difficult right now for people to look at that strategy and see success. So, given in the calculus of some in Washington, Iraq may play a much more significant role strategically than Syria. So the sense that there's going to be a continuation of the status quo in terms of sort of standing on the sideline of the effort going forward, I think the jury's still out. I think people are still trying to sort out what the options are and looking pretty hard at making some decisions. But I think what's qualitatively different about this moment, as opposed to any previous moment in the civil war in Syria, is that we have seen stronger and deeper regional destabilization into an area that potentially could be of greater strategic importance to the United States. So I'm not sure you're going to see a continuation of business as usual from this point out. To the point that, a couple of people have raised here, and I think it's an excellent one, about the need to shore up and work with allies, Saudi Arabia in particular. I think it's a moment where we need to probably look at, walking and chewing gum at the same time. Yes, I think a lot of that needs to happen, and I think we need to be working quite closely with our allies in Saudi and Jordan and bring them on board. But I think it's going to be hard for the U.S. not to do a little bit more, both in the Syria theater and in the Iraq theater, and I think increasingly they're going to become viewed as one theater by folks here in D.C. The last point I would raise is I think it's probably in Saudi's interest to stay involved and engage in this process as much as possible. If nothing else, we saw a couple of weeks ago when this first kicked off, and there were some trial balloons about direct approach and conversation coordination with Iran. I think the U.S. has to be very careful about how it approaches any sort of effort going forward alongside or even any kind of proximity with Iran in the Iraq theater. And having Saudi and others at a table or in a forum where everyone can be part of that conversation is going to be critical to regional stability going forward. So I'm not sure how we don't get everyone to lean in a little bit on this in terms of response to events. Thanks.
Can I comment on that?
Please.
Yes, I agree with Hardin. Saudi Arabia should stay involved, but with limitations. I think the most thing we can do and we should do is to continue in our support to the tribal leaders and the Sunni political leaders in Iraq, to keep them at least afloat, to keep an alternative for a future to replace ISIS. They are weakened very much. The one in control today, it is not them. It is ISIS all over. When they come out, they speak from Erbil. They do not come and speak from Al-Mosul. They don't come out and speak from openly from Al-Ramadi. They are worried about their own security because, as I said before, ISIS do not share power. They see themselves as the power. So that's something Saudi should continue. But it cannot change the situation. We should not put them in confrontation with ISIS. But with Iran, nothing we can do. There is zero trust relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And if Mr. Kerry succeeded in getting the Iranians to accept of a serious, broad-based national government, that could give an opening to Saudi Arabia. Then Saudi Arabia could probably bring Egypt, bring others to support the unity of Iraq. But so far, the only time the Iranians hinted in accepting changing Maliki, they want to change al-Maliki with another loyal Iraqi to them. So far, the Iranians are not for a national unity. Kurdish Sunni Shia government, they're still there, stuck in their sectarian design. So that will put a limitation to what Saudi Arabia can do in Iraq.
Thank you, Jamal. That was Jamal Khashoggi, who joins us by telephone, along with Hardin Lang by telephone. And we also have Fahad Nazer here on webcam. Richard Wilson, President of Saudi U.S. Trade Group. I'm Patrick Ryan with Susris. We're in the last couple of minutes of our FocusKSA webinar on the crisis in Iraq, implications for Saudi Arabia. We've run a little bit over, and we'll start to wrap it up. Richard, I think, has a couple more questions in the queue, and then we'll give our guest panelists time to close with their comments. Richard?
Well, we had a question from Walid Jawad with regard to Saudi's strategic approach to Iraq and Syria, and are they compartmentalizing the approach? And is this you know, has chances for success? I thought it was interesting that Hardin mentioned the U.S. That, you know, on the U.S. side, there's a chance that this will all be seen as the same conflict, and Iraq and Syria will be melded together. So the question to you, Jamal, is that something that is trending in Saudi Arabia as well? To see it all as one unified conflict?
To see what exactly as a conflict?
Well, to not compartmentalize. The question is, are they separating Syria and Iraq? Now, you know, my sense is that as you have all pointed out, they see Syria as the point of origin for all of this.
No, it is very much wrong to separate Syria from Iraq. Syria spillover is what is causing the situation in Iraq, plus Maliki's sectarian policies. But I'm sure if we have handled Syria differently 3 years ago, we wouldn't be at this mess. Syria is the magnet for all those chaos. Maybe in the past the policy was to fix Syria, fix Iraq. I think now we should worry about saving what is left and damaged in the region. For Syria and Iraq, history has to run its course. Wrong people doing right things, or maybe this is the right way to put it, but we have to let history run its course. Those countries, God knows when they will re-emerge, in what format, but there is really very little we can do, particularly in Iraq. More we can do in Syria, because Syria relatively is not designed to be breaking into different regions like in Iraq. Syria can be united, and maybe with Mosul part of it. But now we have to worry about Jordan, about Saudi Arabia, about Egypt, because I have a very bad feeling that this chaotic situation is very much spreadable, very much contagious.
You know, I have a number of questions, but I think we should close here. Fahad, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to Syria being the root of the current turmoil, I think, and in addition to the fact that I think Assad's brutality has allowed Al-Qaeda through this ISIS to rebrand itself. I think that the conflict in Syria has also unfortunately led to a wave of sectarianism across the region that we haven't seen in many years. I see it on a daily basis, certainly on social media, but you also see it. It's very easily detected in mainstream media. The conflict in Syria quickly turned into a sectarian. The sectarian component, certainly at this point, dominates, and obviously there's carryover into Iraq, and it's a very so sectarianism has polarized both these conflicts and made it, I think, incredibly difficult for the Saudis, and to be honest, for the U.S. as well, because as tempting as it is for the United States to want to do something about Al-Qaeda fighters being out in the open in either Syria or Iraq, the truth is, if the U.S. gets involved militarily, then Al-Qaeda and soon thereafter, many Sunnis will say this is nothing but a U.S.-Iranian Assad-Maliki axis against the Sunnis of the region, and it will inflame sectarianism even further. And so I really, unfortunately, there's no easy situations. But again, it all goes back to Syria. Now, what can be done about it? People have made proposals, and but unfortunately, the truth is, 3 years onwards, that conflict is not near being resolved, and it's obviously spilled over into Iraq. But also, there's at least 1 million refugees in Lebanon alone. There's refugees in Jordan and Turkey, and some in Saudi Arabia as well. So it was a Pandora's box that Assad, again, I can't emphasize that enough, that he's to blame for much of this. And if Maliki wants to blame somebody for what's happening in his country, a foreign entity, I think he should blame Assad before anybody else, to be honest.
Certainly, I'll be sort of quick and broad. I think this is a moment where, you know, those in Washington and elsewhere, we need to be a bit humble about what can be done and what's achievable in the immediate, and then looking out a bit farther. At the same time, I have the sense that we've crossed a bit of a moment in terms of the level of engagement that you're going to see both on Iraq and Syria. But if any of that's to succeed, I think it has to be done in coordination with our partners in the region. I mean, it will be hard for anything to happen probably without Iran at least having a sense, and the U.S. having a sense of what the other is doing. But we can't do that without having Saudi and others at the table to at least be cognizant of actions. Because the last thing, as I think, and Jamal pointed out, I mean, the critical bit here is to try to contain further. It's just not clear if the traditional strategy that's been employed in Syria of containment almost passively will be successful. And I think we may be looking at a more active form of containment going forward. And here, you're going to need Saudi and Jordan and others at the table. Thanks.
Hardin, you know, in the lead up to the President Obama's visit to Saudi Arabia in March, and then in the aftermath, there seemed to be a much more coordinated approach between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. In Syria. You know, Mohammed bin Naif took over the portfolio. You started to see reports of surface-to-air missiles appearing in Syria. Do you see an expansion on this cooperation in Syria?
I haven't seen the expansion yet. I mean, what we have seen so far are a closer alignment of efforts. I haven't been in southern Turkey since May, but when we were there last and we met with different groups who were sort of moving in and out across the border with Syria, And I mean, the conversations you had, it seems that both the United States and Saudi and others still have their own particular groups who they're spending time and energy on. So when you would meet with one faction or another within the quote-unquote moderate opposition, there would be conversations to the effect of this group belongs to Saudi, this one is funded by the United States, and here you can see the certain anti-tank missiles being used in this theater, and that prescribes the allegiance to the United States. We're going to have to get over that hump. There's going to have to be a greater level of coordination if that effort's going to be successful. The diplomatic atmospherics of this obviously have improved tremendously, and a big part, an important part of that is work both on Saudi but also in Washington to try to reach out more and keep that conversation thick and rich. And so again, I think it is trending in the right direction, but I don't think it's had that big of an impact on sort of ground performance of opposition at this stage in Syria.
Thanks, Mark. Jamal in Bahrain, I guess we're close to the finish. Any final thoughts?
I agree with Harding notion of a more positive containment, and that is Syria. But I'm afraid there will be some in Washington, maybe some in Riyadh, who will say maybe Bashar is useful today. That is very much the wrong analogy. Bashar is the magnet of all evil. Bashar cannot ever again control all of Syria. Bashar is staying. That is a recipe for a continuation of chaos in Syria and civil war, and that is an invitation to ISIS to move into Syria more and more.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. We really appreciate your patience in terms of whatever technical difficulties, but your expertise, I think, is well received by anybody listening in, and of course, this will go out to all our viewers and readers. So greatly appreciated, really high quality stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.